I never thought I'd see Danny Moretti again after that summer night in 1966, when he slid 2 whiskeys across the bar to a couple of scared kids who had no business being in that place. I was 19, Reed was 20, and we were so deep in the closet we could see Narnia. But Danny, he just looked at us with those knowing eyes, wiped down the bar, and said, "Keep your heads down and your voices low," then walked away like serving 2 terrified queer boys in a mob-run bar in Brooklyn was the most natural thing in the world. 54 years later, Danny married us in his backyard in Queens. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, because this story, this love, it didn't begin with romance or even friendship. It began with fear and a desperate need to feel less alone. The summer of 1966 was brutal. Not just the heat, though New York was sweltering, garbage piling up on corners, fire hydrants spraying water into the streets where kids played. It was brutal because I'd just finished my first year at City College, and I was drowning. Drowning in expectations, in the life my parents had mapped out for me, in the knowledge that I was fundamentally different in a way that could get me arrested, beaten, or worse. My father wanted me to take over his accounting firm. My mother was already showing me pictures of nice Italian girls from the neighborhood. And I was lying awake every night thinking about my roommate's laugh, the way sunlight hit his shoulders when he'd study shirtless in our dorm room, hating myself for noticing. I'd started going to this bar called The Underground. Terrible name, I know, but accurate. It was literally in a basement on Bleecker Street, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past the unmarked door. It wasn't exclusively a gay bar, not officially, because that would have been illegal, but everyone there knew what it was. You could tell by the way men's eyes lingered just a fraction too long, by the careful distance they maintained in public, by the way conversations stopped when someone unfamiliar walked in. I'd been going there for 3 weeks, nursing single beers for hours, too scared to talk to anyone, when I first saw Reed. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, and I noticed his hands first. He was turning his glass in slow circles, and his fingers were stained with what looked like paint or ink. He had dark hair that kept falling into his eyes, and he'd push it back, with those paint-stained fingers leaving little smudges on his forehead. He looked as terrified as I felt. I watched him for probably 40 minutes before I worked up the courage to move to the bar stool next to his. Even then, I couldn't speak. I just sat there, ordered another beer I wouldn't finish, and tried to remember how to breathe. It was Reed who finally spoke. He didn't look at me, just kept turning that glass, and he said, "Do you ever feel like you're watching your life happen to someone else, like you're not really inside your own body?" I remember every word of that first conversation. I told him yes, all the time, like I'm following a script someone else wrote. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were this incredible gray-green, like the ocean before a storm. He said, "I'm Reed. I'm supposed to be studying engineering, but I want to paint. My father thinks art is for women and communists." "I'm Adrian," I told him. "I'm supposed to be an accountant, but I don't know what I want." Except I knew. Even then, 3 minutes into meeting him, I knew I wanted to keep talking to him, keep sitting next to him, keep existing in this space where he was turning that glass, and I was finally breathing properly for the first time in months. We started meeting there every Thursday. It became our night. We'd sit at that same bar, talking for hours about everything except the real reason we were there. Reed told me about growing up in Boston, about his 3 sisters who could do no wrong, about how he'd learned to make himself invisible. I told him about Brooklyn, about my mother's expectations and my father's disappointment, about feeling like I was constantly translating myself into a language everyone else could understand. We talked about books and music and whether the Mets had any chance at all that season. We talked around the truth, dancing at the edges of it, both of us too afraid to say the words out loud. The thing is, I was falling for him, slowly, then all at once, like that Hemingway line about going bankrupt. I'd catch myself watching his mouth when he talked, memorizing the way he laughed, this surprised sound like he hadn't expected to find something funny. I'd go home and replay our conversations, analyzing every word, every pause, trying to figure out if he felt it too or if I was alone in this. Then came the night everything changed. It was August, so hot the air felt solid. Reed showed up late, his shirt half untucked, and I could tell immediately something was wrong. He sat down next to me and ordered a whiskey, which he never did. He always drank beer, nursed it slowly like I did. The bartender, this older guy with slicked back hair and a nose that had been broken more than once, raised an eyebrow but poured the drink. Reed downed it in one gulp and ordered another. I asked him what happened, and he said, "My father found my sketchbook, the one with the drawings. He didn't have to explain what drawings." I understood. I reached out without thinking and put my hand on his arm, right there at the bar where anyone could see, and he looked at my hand like it was the first kind thing anyone had shown him in days. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Not the bar," I meant, "not just tonight. We need to actually leave, go somewhere we can breathe." Reed looked at me and said, "Where would we even go?" Everywhere is the same, but it wasn't a no, it was a question. That's when the cops came in. 2 of them, uniformed, walking through the bar like they owned it. Everyone went silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I felt Reed tense beside me, and I realized my hand was still on his arm. I pulled it back, but it was too late. One of the cops was looking right at us. The bartender moved fast. He came over, all business, and said, "You two, you need to leave now, back door, go." But the cops were already moving toward us. One of them said, "Well, well, what do we have here?" And I felt my entire body go cold. This was it. This was how it ended. Arrested, my parents finding out, my life over at 19. Then Danny Moretti stepped between us and the cops. I didn't know his name then, didn't know anything about him except he was the owner and apparently had enough pull with the local precinct to keep the bar running. He said these kids were just leaving, officers, no trouble here. The cops said they look like trouble to me, Danny. Looks like they were getting a little too comfortable. Danny pulled out his wallet and I watched him slip the cop what had to be at least $50. He said, "They're leaving, they won't be back, you have my word." Then he turned to us and said, "Get out, don't come back here, go find somewhere safer." His voice was hard, but his eyes weren't. He looked at us like he understood, like he'd been us once. Reed and I practically ran out the back door into the alley. We kept walking, not talking, just moving through the hot night until we ended up at the Brooklyn Bridge. We stood there looking at the water and I was shaking so hard, my teeth were chattering despite the heat. Reed said we almost got arrested. We could be in a cell right now. They could have called our parents. And I said, I know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched you." Reed turned to look at me and he said, "I'm glad you did. I'm glad you touched me. I've been wanting you to for weeks. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if you felt it too." That's when I kissed him, right there on the Brooklyn Bridge with the city lights reflecting off the water and the sound of traffic behind us. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before we both pulled back, terrified, looking around to see if anyone saw. But no one was paying attention to 2 boys standing too close together. The city was full of people with their own problems. We didn't go back to the underground. We didn't go to any bars. Instead, we got careful. We became experts at hiding in plain sight. We were roommates, we told people, just 2 friends sharing an apartment to save money. Reed's father had disowned him, so he'd dropped out of engineering and was working at a print shop during the day, painting at night. I finished my degree because my parents were still paying for it, but I moved in with Reed to a tiny studio in the village. We had 1 bed, which we explained away to the landlord by saying the apartment was so small we'd turned the bedroom into Reed's art studio, and we'd bought a pull-out couch for the living room. The landlord didn't believe us, but he didn't care enough to make an issue of it. Those years were hard. We were always looking over our shoulders, always conscious of how we stood, how we talked, whether we were showing too much affection in public. We had friends, other men like us, but even those friendships were risky. The raids were constant. People we knew got arrested, lost jobs, got sent to psychiatric hospitals for conversion therapy. We lived in a constant state of low-level terror, but we also lived. We built a life together in that tiny apartment. Reed painted, and his work was good, really good, though he couldn't show it anywhere legitimate because his subjects were too obviously male, too obviously painted with desire. I got my accounting degree and started working at a firm in Midtown. We figured out how to be together in a world that said we couldn't exist. We learned the gay beaches, the parks where you could walk holding hands after dark, the private parties where we could dance together. We built a community of people who understood. And we stayed together through the 70s, through Stonewall, which happened just blocks from our apartment. We were there that night, not inside the bar, but close enough to see the cops, to see people fighting back for the first time, to feel something shift in the air. Through the 80s, which were brutal, watching friends die of a disease the government wouldn't acknowledge, going to funeral after funeral, wondering if we'd be next. Through the 90s and the slow, painful progress. Through the new millennium. We moved to Queens eventually, bought a small house, which we could do because we'd learned to present as two lifelong bachelors, business partners, nothing suspicious. Reed's paintings started selling under a pseudonym. I made partner at my firm. We were successful by any measure, but we couldn't get married. Couldn't have hospital visitation rights automatically. Couldn't file joint tax returns. Couldn't call each other husband in public without risking everything we'd built. We'd long since forgotten about Danny Moretti. That night at the Underground had become just another story in our shared history, one of many close calls and narrow escapes. We'd never gone back to find him, never tried to thank him for whatever he'd done that night that kept us out of jail. Then, in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled marriage equality nationwide. I remember sitting in our living room watching the news, and Reed was crying and I was crying, and we were both just staring at the television like we couldn't quite believe it was real. After 49 years together, we could finally get married. We didn't rush into it. We'd waited this long, we could wait a little longer. We talked about what we wanted. A small ceremony, just close friends, nothing fancy. We looked into efficiency, and that's when Reed said, "What about finding Danny? What if we could find the bartender from that night? Wouldn't that be something to have him marry us?" I thought it was impossible. That was 50 years ago. Danny would be in his 80s if he was even still alive. But Reed got obsessed with the idea. He started searching online, going through old records. He found out the Underground had been shut down in a raid in 1968, the same year Danny Moretti had been arrested for running an illegal gambling operation out of a club in Chelsea. He'd done 2 years, gotten out, and disappeared from public records. Reed kept searching. He found Danny's daughter on Facebook, sent her a message explaining who we were and what her father had done for us that night. We didn't expect a response. But 3 days later, she called. Danny was alive, living in Queens, about 15 minutes from our house. He was 86, had been married twice, had 4 kids and 9 grandchildren. He'd left the bar business after his arrest, worked construction for 30 years, retired, and spent his time now gardening and complaining about the Mets. His daughter said she'd told him about Reed's message, and he remembered that night. He said he'd love to see us. We met him at a diner in Astoria. I recognized him immediately, even though 50 years had turned his black hair white and added about 50 pounds and a whole lot of wrinkles. But his eyes were the same, that knowing look. He stood up when we walked in, and Reed and I both froze because we didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for saving your life? Danny hugged us both. He said, "Sit down, let me look at you. You two made it, you stayed together. That doesn't happen enough." Then he sat down and said, "I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for someone to come back and tell me they made it." We talked for 3 hours. Danny told us about his life, the choices he'd made, the things he regretted. He said he'd known he was protecting queer kids that night, that he'd done it because his younger brother was gay and had killed himself in 1952 after being arrested in a park. He said he couldn't save his brother, but he could try to save other people's brothers. He'd paid off cops, given warnings, done what he could with the limited power he had. We told him about our life, 54 years of loving each other, building a life in the margins, surviving. And then Reed asked him if he'd marry us. Danny got tears in his eyes, this tough old guy who'd probably broken bones for money back in the day, and he said it would be the honor of my life. Danny got ordained online. It took him 3 tries because he wasn't great with computers, but his daughter helped him. We planned the ceremony for June 2020 for Pride Month in Danny's backyard. We invited 30 people, friends who'd been with us through the decades, the community we'd built. Then COVID hit. We had to postpone, then postpone again. Danny was high risk. We were in our 70s. Everyone was scared. We thought maybe we'd never get to do it, that we'd waited 54 years and a pandemic was going to steal it from us at the last minute. But in September 2020, things calmed down enough. We did it in Danny's backyard with just 10 people, everyone masked, socially distanced. Danny stood there with his notes shaking in his hands because he was nervous, and he said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you two. I've known you for about 5 minutes of your life together, just that one night and these past few months. But I've been thinking about courage. It takes courage to love someone when the world tells you that love is wrong. It takes courage to build a life together when you can't even hold hands in public. It takes courage to survive. You two are the bravest people I've ever met." He married us in his garden under a maple tree that was just starting to turn red. Reed wore a suit he'd bought in 1985 that still fit. I wore my father's watch, the only thing I'd kept after he died without ever accepting who I was. Our friends cried behind their masks. Danny pronounced us married, and we kissed. And it was legal, it was real, it was finally recognized by the world. After the ceremony, Danny pulled us aside. He said, "I need to tell you something. That night in 1966, I didn't just pay off those cops. I told them you were my nephew and his friend, that you'd snuck in with fake IDs, that I was throwing you out and you'd never come back. I gave them $100, which was a fortune to me then. I did it because when I looked at you two, I saw my brother. I saw kids who just wanted to love each other, and I thought maybe if I could save you, it would mean something. It would mean my brother didn't die for nothing." We stood there in his garden, 3 old men crying, and I thought about that night 54 years ago. How scared we were. How close we came to losing everything before we'd even begun. How one person's kindness, one moment of courage, had given us the chance to build this life. Danny died 6 months later in March 2021. His daughter called to tell us. She said he talked about our wedding all the time, showed everyone pictures, told the story to anyone who'd listen. She said it made him happy, knowing he'd been part of our story coming full circle. Reed and I are 74 now. We've been together 58 years, married for 3. We're old, we're tired, we have health problems and bad knees and all the things that come with age. But we made it. We survived. We loved each other through decades of fear and hiding and loss, and we came out the other side. Sometimes I think about all the people who didn't make it, who didn't survive. Danny's brother, our friends who died of AIDS, the people who couldn't withstand the pressure and the hate. We survived partly through luck, partly through privilege, partly through the kindness of people like Danny who stood between us and the worst of it. I don't know why I'm telling you this story now. Maybe because I want people to know that this love we have, this marriage that's legal now, it wasn't always possible. Maybe because I want younger queer people to know what came before, what it cost. Maybe because I want everyone to know that small acts of courage matter, that paying off those cops or standing between scared kids and the law or just being kind can change the trajectory of someone's entire life. Or maybe I just want to remember Danny Moretti, the bartender who served us illegally in 1966 and married us legally in 2020, who saw two terrified boys and decided they deserved a chance. He gave us that chance, and we took it, and we built a life. And now I'm sitting here in our house in Queens, Reed painting in his studio, and I'm grateful. So grateful for every year, every moment, every day we got to love each other. That's the story. That's what I wanted to tell you. We made it. Against all odds, through everything, we made it.